Brad Schuhler. I'm your host for the Masculine Mindset. And today we have a most interesting guest, David Corbishley. He's a former English teacher who's turned into a life coach here and done some pretty interesting things dealing with men in their 30s and 40s who have been dealing with, burnout and loss of purpose. I think things that many of us can relate to here. So I'm excited to be able to talk to him and hear what he's got to say.
Welcome to the Zarlequan.
Morning there, David. How you doing?
Yeah, not too bad. What time is it there now?
It's like noon, or actually 1 o'clock. Yeah, a couple minutes till 1. So what about you?
It's 9 o'clock in the evening.
Oh, wow. Yeah. A little later in the day. You can tell me how the day went,
Yeah, it wasn't too bad. Quite an early start. And then, I had a coaching session with a client, self-defense coaching session. And then I had a personal coaching, like a life coaching session with another client. And then wrote a couple of articles. And that's pretty much the whole day, yeah.
Excellent.
Nice to meet you. So do you want to hear how it started, or?
Yeah, let's go with the beginning. Why not, right?
So yeah, like I said, I was a teacher for over 10 years in East London in the UK. And then lockdown happened. I went through quite a messy breakup with my ex-partner. And I was left feeling quite isolated during the first lockdown, and kind of got into a spiral of guilt and shame. I'm a suicide survivor as a result of that. And I got back from the hospital, and I sort of read the will and testimony that I've written for myself, and started laughing. And it's quite a weird reaction, but it was just like, it was so ridiculous because this thing obviously meant nothing to anybody. It wouldn't have stood up in any court. It was completely written in a completely unstable state of mind.
Right.
And I sort of had a realization then I had to do something to help myself. I had to do something to sort it out. And then I also had another moment of clarity that I actually wanted to help other people as well, knowing what it felt like to be in that position. So I started a journey, essentially beginning with mindfulness and meditation, and then working on my fitness, and then rebuilding relationships with my family and my friends. And it took several years to get back to a position where I felt solid again, and even happy, I would say. A really long process. And then I thought, right, I've got something here that I can share with other people. And I was sitting in the first day of school last year in 2022, in the same meeting we'd had for 10 years, in the same sort of job I've been doing for 10 years. And I thought, right, if I don't do something now, I'm going to end up being 65 in the same job, in the same school. And I thought, right, so I took the leap. I went into the head teacher that day. I handed my notice in, and essentially quit at Christmas, and then started this new journey of helping other people in the same position or avoid being in the same position. What I found was the vast majority of my clients were actually business owners. Yeah. So then I retrained again to develop business coaching skills and started working with business clients as well to help prevent them get to that stage as well. So trying to get in early intervention is obviously better than a cure.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, and then, fitting them with the tools and directing them, in ways that improves the situation.
No, exactly. And I think burnout is a real issue. I think, especially as men, there's also this big question. Go on, sorry.
So I'm curious, why do you think it's such a big issue with men, especially in our modern times?
I think there's this sort of crisis of masculinity in many ways, right?
Yeah.
Where, especially for men of about my age, which is, I'm approaching 40 now, where we were kind of brought up thinking that to be a man was one thing. And then suddenly in the last maybe 10 or 15 years, you've kind of had this complete reversal of that, or not reversal, I would say, but a complete shift in what it means to be a man. And people are feeling kind of lost a little bit about masculinity and how to be a man in the modern day and what is acceptable, and sort of like following on. We wanted to be like our dads when we were younger, and now that kind of thing isn't as acceptable in many ways, if that makes sense.
Right.
So
No,
there's a
makes
lot of
perfect
challenges
sense.
there. There's a lot of challenges there, and then I think the one thing that men often do as a result of that is hold things in and keep hold of things, because we're not sure whether we can say how we're feeling, and we're not sure whether people want to listen. There's
Because
alarming statistics.
as men, oftentimes, I mean, I know I've been in this situation where if you show weakness, how can you be an effective leader? How can you be, if you are overly emotional, or if you share your problems, then maybe you're not an effective leader if you're unable to share the problems. These are some of the thought processes and beliefs that we have to contend with.
No, exactly. So I think that, yeah, there's a big issue there. There's a big sort of loss, and I think loss of purpose is a big thing as well, right?
Yeah,
Is kind of, in the old days, we kind of, as men, you kind of knew what your role was.
exactly. Things are
And
well
a lot of,
defined.
yeah, things are well defined. You're the breadwinner, you're the leader of the household.
Right.
And I'm not, I mean, I am a feminist and I believe in equality, don't get me wrong, but I think where you have such a big social shift in such a short period of time, it's quite difficult for many people to sort of find their new position in that new society. And I think that's definitely the case when it comes to men, or a lot of men anyway. So it's like
Yeah.
your wife or your partner is now an equal breadwinner, or more of a breadwinner than you. And so you're
Right.
left questioning, right, what is my clearly defined role now, in many ways?
And
And I think a lot of men have issue with that. And then
right.
again, they have that issue of showing that vulnerability, right? So
Yeah.
expressing to people that I'm unhappy. We're not taught, we weren't taught at art when we were younger, we weren't taught, we were always taught boys don't cry, which is obviously a very negative thing, and
Right.
men should feel free to express emotions. But that's what we
Right.
were taught, and now we're taught, actually, you shouldn't be that. You should be something else. But those things are so ingrained in us that it becomes very confusing and difficult to deal with.
That's true. And
Um,
yeah, I don't know with you, but I know a lot of men out there uh, are in the situation where, the mission, the work, the goal comes first. How we feel about it is irrelevant. We got to get through. We have to finish this. We have to do this. We have to accomplish this. And so much of us and our identity is wrapped up in that, that now that things have changed, it's a challenge to see, how do I fit in? Where am I needed? Where am I valued? And I see a lot of that struggle. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to start this masculine mindset, so we can have conversations about it. So we can, talk to other men and be like, hey, be there to support one another.
no, definitely. I think that is, and I think there's a growing movement of it as well. So
Yeah.
there's a group in London which is called the Proper Blokes Club, and what they do is they meet up and they just go for a walk. They just go for a walk. They sort of start walking along next to each other and having a chat. And I think things like that are really powerful. And I was actually running some sessions at a local men's group. They call it the Man Cave. Um, and yeah, so we were running some mindfulness sessions, and it's quite an interesting thing. You had all these old proper geezers, old London geezers, all sitting there and doing this breath work together and being quite open and vulnerable with each other. So there is that shift happening,
Yeah.
but it's quite a slow shift that's happening. And for some people, they're not sure how to make that shift as well, and then that
Right.
causes that problem, right?
Yeah.
And then with people, we're taught to bottle things up. We're taught to hold on to our emotions and hold things within, and then it becomes an overload situation, and then it ends up, it's like a dam. You have all
Yeah.
this sort of stuff that's
Pressure.
building up and building up and building up, and eventually it explodes and bursts. And we're
Yeah.
only ever taught to express ourselves, or we were only taught to express ourselves really with violence and anger. They're the
Exactly.
As a man, you're allowed to be angry. That's your emotion you can display. And then we take that anger out, we turn it on ourselves, because then we think, right, why are we struggling with this idea so much? There must be something wrong with me.
Right.
And then that leads to obviously quite tragic circumstances in many cases.
Or what you touched on earlier, guilt and shame, and a lot of those emotions that we don't either have the tools or are not familiar with. or ignore most of the time.
No, exactly. And I think it's really interesting because guilt is feeling bad that you've done something wrong, right?
Right. Right.
And everyone does things wrong, and feeling guilty about it is a good thing because it shows you're not
Right.
a psychopath. It shows you have human emotions, right?
Right.
Shame is feeling that you're a bad person because you've done things wrong. And then that's a very important distinction, right? Because if you think you're a bad person, then you think you're destined to do bad things.
Right.
And then it becomes a sort of situation where you're then loathing yourself for those
It's more
feelings that you're having.
identity driven instead of action driven.
Exactly.
You
So
know,
it's really
it's easier
important
to change what you do. It's harder to change who you are.
exactly 100%. And in many ways, I mean, I'm a strong believer that people can change.
Yeah.
But in many ways, for many people, it becomes something impossible to change who you are because it is so ingrained in you that this is who you are now. And it becomes the part of your everyday existence. And then you find yourself living up to that identity, that label that you've given yourself.
Right.
Which then exacerbates it and makes it worse. And then again, like we said, that pressure behind that dam just builds up and builds up and builds
It
up.
does.
And unless you find a productive outlet for it, it gets too much.
Yeah.
And even with productive outlets, this is another issue, is you can find something that you feel is a productive outlet, exercise or a hobby or whatever it is, but actually that can then turn itself into something negative as well if you're not careful, and you end up with people who have severe body dysmorphia amongst men now as a big issue,
right,
which we wouldn't have thought 15-20 years ago. But because they become so obsessed that now their identity is looking a certain way or being a certain thing, and become so wrapped up in it, and that it becomes controlling and debilitating.
And the tools themselves become almost like the prison that keeps you stuck instead of freeing you as they're designed to do.
Exactly. I think that's a really good metaphor for it. I think another thing about men in general, again, I'm generalizing, it's not all men.
Of course.
But, we tend to become very fixated on things, right? So I don't know if you've ever
focus. Yes. I'm focused on this. Everything else doesn't exist.
Exactly. Like, ancient Rome. You know, there was this weird thing recently about how many times a day do you think of ancient Rome, and like men were saying, like 3 times a day. And it's like you have an interest which could be quite niche and quite tiny, but it becomes something that you become completely engrossed in. And that lack of balance is something that can be quite damaging, right? Because harmony comes in balance.
Out of curiosity, what do you think your insight into that is? The ancient Roman guys being, what do you think that is?
It's a weird one, isn't it? Because I thought about it. I thought actually I do think about ancient Rome more than I thought I did. When you actually stop to thinking about it. And I think there's something about it that appeals to men in terms of the order and the structure. And I guess it's the way it's presented to us as being this sort of like very sort of almost rigid hierarchy where everyone knows their place, and they sort of did such amazing things with advanced technology so much and sort of brought so much to the world, but did it in such a way that was so structured and regimented and almost sort of like squared off, and you always, when you think of Roman soldiers, you think about their sort of the tortoise phalanx where they've got their shields up on the top and in front, and it's that sort of symmetry to things I think is really appealing for a lot of men.
I think there is some sort of archetype that kind of resonates, I think, for men with that.
Yeah, definitely. I think also the idea of the sort of the strong leaders that Rome had, the way that they're presented to us, like the Augustus Caesar, and maybe not Nero so much, but Julius Caesar, men who knew what they wanted, and they went out and got it. Even like Brutus, he knew even though he's painted really badly in Shakespeare and stuff,
and
as being the great betrayer.
And where I think also maybe it was an environment in which men were allowed to express their masculinity, and that was almost an expectation. As far as nowadays, it's kind of very fluid and more like, what is it exactly to be a man? Is it what, like you talked earlier, is it what my dad and grandfather was? Is it, what the media is telling me it is? Is it this? Is it that? I think it gives us a sense of certainty to a degree. I think maybe that's part of what's so appealing to it.
No, 100%. I think we definitely we always want what we feel we lack, right?
That's true.
And we also have a tendency to glorify the past and sort of
That
smooth
is true
over
as well.
the incredible negative things that also happened during the Roman Empire.
Right.
It's quite easy to, I mean, retrospect. You talk about like a rose-tinted spectacles. You talk about 2,000 years ago. It's quite easy.
Yeah.
Those rose-tinted spectacles get quite thick. But yeah, I think there is definitely that appeal, especially for a lot of men, in a time when things were simpler for us.
Yeah.
And we didn't have to think. And I think a lot of, like, without being derogatory towards men, obviously, I think we are quite simple creatures generally.
Yeah.
We're very complex on a layer, but there's very few things it takes to keep a man happy, I think.
Yeah.
Again, you see like the internet memes, like where it's a guy showing, oh, this is my perfect setup, and it's like a chair, a TV, and a beer cooler, and then like a mattress, and then it's like, yeah, this is how I live. And
the essentials are taken care of, you know.
And every man in the comments like, what's the problem here? Why? Like, that's great. Am I adding this or am I adding that?
Yeah.
And we're quite simple, and we yearn for simplicity, I think. And I think we're given a situation and an identity now, which has to be quite complicated.
Yeah.
And many of us don't really enjoy it. And we kind of yearn for that simpler time.
Right. Or we don't have necessarily the skills to navigate it, because you've had, you've had this new thing that's been, thrust on the world, that's thrust on us, the internet, doing things, everything being more complex than it used to be, roles changing, expectations changing. But, if we're using the old model, those weren't skills that were needed nor necessary. And now with the new model, it's kind of like, or models, because it's not necessarily just one. We're just kind of like, we don't really have what it takes, and where do we go to like come up with it,
Yeah, and I think it's also that example again where our role models were our fathers. Okay, and I'm not speaking for everyone, but my personal relationship with my dad wasn't massively great, and I think a lot of men don't have a great relationship with their dad. It can be quite distant. Their dad was someone who was working a lot, or their dad was someone who was an authoritarian figure, and who they rebelled against often. So there was never that sort of passing on of knowledge, other than an example to follow, as it were.
Right.
There was never that sort of back and forth, which I think women have a lot more with their mothers, where they're kind of a lot more sort of in sync and having that discussion.
Yeah.
As they're growing up. So yeah, I think we haven't been taught the skills, and then suddenly we're having it thrust upon us, but it's not really covered in schools or sort of formal education. No. It's never really been, and the changes happen so quickly and so quickly that it can make you leave you feeling confused and disorientated, I guess.
Yeah.
Like if you think it's only in the last maybe 10 or 15 years, 20 years maybe tops, where these sort of things have been changing, and now it's completely done a 180, and we're going in the opposite direction with what a man has to be. Even things like having a job, like
well, then most people I don't necessarily,
and
a pattern that I've noticed, right? Things, you have a lack over here. And so in order to, meet that lack or change it, things go all the way over here, right? Not necessarily to the level you want them to be, but oftentimes I find it's in the middle that you find a lot of things that work pretty well, but coming to that point, and what is that middle point? Some of the things from the old were good, and some of the things the new model are good. How are we going to incorporate those things together to make something that works practically for us?
No, exactly. And it's like I was saying before, like happiness lies in balance, right?
Yes.
It doesn't lie in being here or there. It lies in finding that middle ground. Yeah. And I think on the part of men, to some extent, there needs to be that willingness to change and that desire to change and meet in the middle. And I think there's often that resistance because it's something we're uncomfortable with doing, and it's an identity we're unsure of. I think that it also, which I'm trying to do with my own sons, there needs to be that willingness of dads to be closer with their sons and have a stronger bond in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not talking about all dads. And I think we will get there, but I think we're in the middle of the transition phase.
It's true.
We're right in the middle of it. And we're also in the middle of this weird transition phase where this sort of technology has amazingly increased and gathered speed in the last 20 years. And as a society, we're still struggling to manage it and cope with it.
It's true. And it's only getting faster and quicker, and with AI and everything like that, it's off the chart.
I mean, so I was a teacher and now I run projects in school. So we do self-defense and mindfulness and mindset coaching with young adults in London. And it's actually quite encouraging because a lot of kids now are rejecting smartphones and going back to the old like Nokia style bricks because they're like, I don't want my life to be consumed by this. So we've gone to this point where everyone became so engrossed and consumed by their phones, and now there's this sort of kickback against it. And I think we're going to start finding, where technology is a tool. And I think maybe in the last 5 or 10 years, we've kind of lost sight of that a little bit, and it's become something which dictates your life rather than helps your life. When you see people who are spending 8-9 hours a day on the internet looking at the same things over and over again.
Right.
And I think we're now, as a society, going to have to learn how to manage that behavior and control it a lot more effectively, because otherwise we are going to see mess. And we're seeing it in the young people. There's the mental health issues are just growing at an exponential rate.
They essentially lose themselves,
No, exactly.
Because there's no place that they're grounding.
Yeah. And it's that human connection as well.
Connection and grounding. That's essential. But yeah, I also wanted to ask you about your book, Blank and Adventure and Magic.
Yeah. So I've literally just so I've got it here. It's showing up a bit blurry. It's written under a pseudonym.
Gotcha.
It's a traditional adventure story.
But it has
with a modern twist.
Issues like identity, family, philosophy, environment, those sort of aspects, which are directly what we're kind of talking about.
No, exactly. And I think that was kind of a happy coincidence as well. The idea for it started as a German university when I was in a lecture and I was pretty bored. And I just started writing in this lecture. And if you're at university right now, don't do that. Pay attention to your lectures. One of my biggest regrets is not attending more of my lectures and paying more attention. But I just started writing. I just wrote this introduction, and it was about this sort of weird life force that controls the world. I don't know. It was a bit weird, and then I sort of put it away, and then came back to it in the lockdown after my episode, and started really developing it into a full story. And it's kind of an adventure story, and the protagonist is never named. So they're not identified by gender or race or sex or any. So they're blanked out. That's the name. The name of the book is Blank, and that wasn't anything to do with cool. So the idea was when I was teaching in a school, and most of the students were British Bangladeshi kids, and every time we'd do creative writing, they would write a story about Jack or Emma, and it's like, why aren't you writing a story about Abdul or Mohammed or Yasmin? Like, because they've never read a book with an Abdul or a Mohammed or a Yasmin. So I thought, right, what I want to do then is create a book where anyone who's reading it can imagine themselves as the protagonist, can put their name in it, whatever their background is, wherever they're from, whatever creed, race, ethnicity, anything. They can say, right, I'm the main character in this, and this is my story. And so that was the basic premise. And it's a story about a kid who saves the world from an environmental disaster. And by the world, we mean a tiny bit of the world, which is outside his house, but which is his entire world, as it were.
But that's the place to start, anyways. As people, take the reins and begin to shape their world, other people shaping the world, just like you and I having this conversation here, two different parts, shaping two different parts of the world coming together, kind of in a bigger,
exactly.
and
Yeah.
that's how it's done.
No, exactly. And it's like it's that constant question, what do you mean by the world? What is the world to you?
Right.
You know, when someone says, "Oh, my world has ended," the
Right.
world hasn't ended, but that person's world has ended. And like when you
Right.
talk about when we're meeting, there's two worlds colliding. You know, it all our language is littered with these metaphors about the world, and your world is your world, and
Yeah.
your world can be small or it could be massive, and you can dictate how big it is. And I guess it comes back to that thing, doesn't it, where technology can limit our world to being this little box in our hand.
Right.
The kid in the book, blank, is a kid who's a bit unusual and is not considered normal. So he doesn't like spending all his time playing video games. He likes spending his time exploring outside, which is how he ends up falling into this adventure, being kind of recruited by a gang of animals and a drunk and overweight fairy who smokes cigarettes, chain smoking fairy called Bob, who wears a string vest and has got a can of beer at the beginning, and then slowly, as people start believe, so it's that whole Tinkerbell thing. If you believe in fairies, they become real. It's like, no, he doesn't become real. He's always real, but he becomes his true self when he has people believing in him and when he believes in himself. So there's that kind of thing there. Yeah,
That's a great message. Yeah.
Without giving too much away.
Right.
About the end, but yeah, I actually just re-released, I re-edited it again. It's on Amazon if anyone wants to buy it. I'll put the details up, but it's not under my name. And if anyone can work out the pun in the pseudonym and why I've chosen that name, then they can have the copy for free. I'll reimburse their money.
We'll be looking for that. But yeah, you've had a diverse background as far as East London, Pakistan, Vietnam. You lived a lot of different places. How did those places have an impact?
A huge impact. I mean, experiencing different cultures. I mean, even living in London, I speak quite fluent Bengali because I grew up in.
Oh wow!
I grew up amongst a lot of Bangladeshis. My Italian isn't too bad because I had a lot of Italian friends.
Yeah.
So even in London is kind of like living. You can sort of travel around the globe on the tube map, as it were.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Vietnam came a bit later in life. Pakistan, I was very young, so we went there with my family. The most powerful place for me though was Botswana.
Yeah.
And for me, it was just the most incredible place. It is the most incredible place. Just the people there are just so amazingly happy in the face of so much adversity as well. And it really just opened my eyes. You know, like you get a sense of perspective.
Yeah.
And you're like, I thought I had quite a tough upbringing. East End of London's quite a rough place. My parents weren't particularly wealthy. I had 7 brothers and sisters, quite rough and tumble. And then I went to Botswana and I saw these people who really, really had tough lives. There was one kid, so I was working at an orphan daycare center, and there was one kid who parents had died from HIV, and then she got hit by a lorry getting off the bus from school. Ooh. And basically broke every bone in her body, walking on crutches when I turned up. And she just had the biggest smile on her face every day. And it's just like, you know, if this kid in this situation is still smiling, then what right do I have to feel anything other than sort of grateful for what I've got? So that was a real big shifting point in my younger life when I was about 18, 19. But yeah, I think experiencing different cultures opens your eyes to the possibilities of the world, right? And
absolutely,
the fact that the way you've always done things isn't necessarily the right way
or the only way.
Yeah, exactly. There are so many people doing so many different things in so many different ways, and they're all great in their own way, and they're all amazing. Yeah, so that was I would love to travel more now if I wasn't so restricted by work.
Fair enough. Now, David, what would you say would be, if you could give like one piece of advice to men out there, what do you think, what would that be? What would be the biggest piece of advice that you would
think about? The purpose that you want to have. So the first task I always do with new clients for for coaching is I get them to imagine, and it's quite morbid, but it gets better, so just bear with me. Imagine you died today and you had your funeral tomorrow, and you're at your funeral. What are people saying about you?
Right.
Okay. Now imagine you have the best life you possibly could for the rest of your life, and you do everything you possibly could, and you have the most perfect, amazing existence, and you're at your funeral, and what is the eulogy? When they get up to talk about you after your best ever life, what do people say about you? What do you want people to be saying about you?
Right.
And then I say, go and live that eulogy. Go and make that happen. You know, he was a good, kind, caring, strong, compassionate person. He helped other people. Those are your reasons for living. So whatever you imagine you want people to say about you after you're gone, that's how you should be living your life. And find that reason, find that purpose, find that why. And that is the thing that's going to keep you going, even when the walls are closing in and the rain's coming down.
That's good.
Yeah. Thanks.
No, it's just, yeah, that's definitely powerful, because, you know, we think we have forever sometimes, but who knows, you know, life is uncertain.
Exactly. No,
and
exactly.
so today and now is the best time to be the us that we want to be.
No, 100%. So live that life you want to live, leave that legacy you want to leave.
Yeah.
And you're in control. And I think a lot of men feel like they're not in control, but you are. You can be in control of yourself and take control.
Right.
And you can guide your future how you want it to go. And I know that coming from the deepest, darkest pit to where I am now. So yeah.
I know that's not uncommon. It often takes an event or experience like that to get you to reconsider everything. You're like, you know, what direction do I want to go? You know?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I guess it's cliche, but you know, when you're at the bottom, the only way is up, right?
That's true.
And so you just got to start climbing. I quite like my corny sort of metaphors as well. You know, the journey of a million miles starts with a single step, and you know, and it's just start off with that first step and decide where you want to be, and then just start going towards it. And yeah, that's it.
That's awesome. Well, thank you, David. This has been awesome, incredible. I'm so happy that you could come here and share some of, you know, similar issues, but, you know, your perspective on it, how you've navigated and how you're trying to help, you know, others in the process of, you know, burnout and in the process of finding purpose. And that's incredible. That's awesome.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to come on your podcast.
Yeah, but just make sure you get me those links, and we'll include those, because I want to make sure people can get a hold of you. So
no, definitely, I'll send them over straight away.
Sounds good. Thank you, David.
Thank you for joining us on this enlightening episode of the Zarlequan podcast. Remember to subscribe to our newsletter so you never miss a beat.